Have a good day. Buenos dias na todos. So here we are again. This is Sir June Michael Antone, and for today's video, we are going to talk about the ideas of the modern philosophers about the self. This video is part of our subject in the General Education Understanding the Self course. So if you want to learn something about the contention of the modern philosophers about the human person, about the self, then keep on watching this video until the end. So, in this video, we are going to talk about 4 great philosophers in the modern era who successfully contributed something about the human person in the modern times. So, these philosophers are René Descartes, Immanuel Kant, John Locke, and David Hume. So, basically, these philosophers were part of 2 significant movements in the modern times. These were the rationalism and the empiricism. To start with, let us talk about René Descartes. So René Descartes is of course a French philosopher, and he was considered as the father of modern philosophy. So it is important first that before we go to his idea about the self, we have to talk about first the happenings as to what happened in the modern times, towards the transition of modern period, because the significant events that happens in this time actually contributed a lot to René Descartes' contention of the human person. Towards the beginning of the modern era, science came into progress. So I'm referring to experimental science that brought to us technological products. So we have this science that brings truth based on experiments. So this was the time then that scientific truths came into conflict with religious dogmas or religious truths. Another significant event that transpired towards the beginning of the modern era was the Reformation. So we are familiar with the Reformation, in which Christianity was divided into many sects because of the Protestant Reformation. And so Roman Catholicism holds a particular truth based on their dogmas, while the Protestant denominations hold also different truths based on their belief. So this significant event led towards the idea of the cacophony of truths. As a result, the breaking down of religions and the coming of experimental sciences towards the beginning of the modern era led to a diversity of truth. Alin na ba ang katotohanan? Nasaan na yung katotohanan? Ito ba? Sinasabi ng religion? Tapos, hindi naman nagkakasundo? Or, ito bang sinasabi ng siyensya? Which is which? What is now the foundation of the truth? So, to search for the foundation of truth, ito yung ginawa ni René Descartes. Descartes doubted everything. In other words, Descartes put everything into question to search for that certitude, that foundation of truth. So, as he puts everything into question outside of himself, he still could not find the truth outside of him. So, anong ginawa niya? Bumalik siya sa kanyang sarili, inside of him, and he doubted his own existence, whether he exists or not. So, since he could not find the truth outside of him, ayun, he puts also himself into question. And when Descartes went back to himself, he finds out that there is only one thing that he cannot doubt. And what is that? That he is doubting. He says in his famous book, The Meditations, Descartes says that I cannot doubt that I am doubting. Therefore, this is the indubitable doubt, something that cannot be put into question, something that cannot be doubted. And this must be the foundation of truth. And that is, I am doubting. Therefore, Descartes concluded that the cogito, the thinking being, is the foundation of truth. This was the beginning that Descartes formulated his famous dictum, cogito ergo sum, which means I think, therefore I am. Or in some translations, it means that I think, therefore I exist. Now, what is the connection of Descartes' findings of the cogito to his ideas of the self or the human person? So basically, by saying that cogito ergo sum, or I think therefore I exist, Descartes actually concluded that man or the self is the foundation of truth. And kaya nga, this is the very reason why René Descartes was considered as the father of modern philosophy. This is the very reason, because philosophy was almost dying during his time, because of the coming, the progress of the experimental sciences. But Descartes find another way to make philosophy alive in the modern period, and that was looking at man, looking at the self itself as the foundation of truth, and not religion, not also science, but it is the self, but it is the human person, the thinking being, or the cogito. This is a very clear perspective that Descartes believed that the self is composed of the mind and the body. But for René Descartes, it is the cogito, or the mind. The mind refers to the cogito, that is one in existence, while the body is just a mere extension of the mind. The body for René Descartes is just like a machine that is attached to the mind, and the body will be useless without the mind. In other words, Descartes believed that the self has also a body, but the body is just an extension of the mind. For René Descartes, what makes the self a human person is not the body, but it is basically the cogito, or the mind. Because for Descartes, it is the mind that thinks, it is the mind that evaluates, it is the mind that mandates the body, so that the self can exist. And most importantly, it is the mind that affirms or denies, that accepts or rejects whether such proposition or claim is true or not. It is the mind that is the thinking being that makes the self a self, that makes the self different from other forms of beings, that makes the self a human being. Therefore, in Descartes' contention of the self, this is a very clear manifestation that René Descartes himself was a rationalist, the founder of the modern rationalism, which later on Immanuel Kant had also followed in his formulation of his philosophy. However, the empiricists do not like to agree with the rationalists' perspective of the self. Of course, the empiricists would also believe, on the other hand, that the body is needed, for the human person or the self to experience the world. Why? Because we have to understand that empiricism believes that knowledge is entirely coming from human experience. And how can a person experiences the world outside of him? It is actually because through of the body. Diba? It is through the body in which a person experiences the world. Teka lang. We have to know first who is the founder of empiricism. Now we have to discuss first a little bit about empiricism and their ideas of the self before we go to David Hume's perspective of the self. The founding father of empiricism was John Locke. Sino ba itong si John Locke? John Locke was a modern philosopher, of course, in the Enlightenment era, and he was an English philosopher. He was born in England, and he studied in England, so he was an English philosopher. So John Locke believed that a human person at birth is like an empty tablet, or tinatawag niya itong tabula rasa. Yung mind, yung utak ng tao at birth is empty talaga, walang laman. And it is through the person's experiences with his family, with the world, with the environment around him that gives him knowledge there in the mind. So in other words, John Locke believed that knowledge is entirely a product of experience. So what is then the self for John Locke? So basically, believing that at birth our human mind is empty, then John Locke believes that the self is actually in continuous development through human experiences. In other words, that the self is not yet a finished product. You know, that the self is to be molded, the self is to be nourished, the self is to be developed through human interactions, through human experiences outside of him. Another empiricist philosopher who followed the footsteps of John Locke was David Hume. So David Hume was a Scottish philosopher, was also branded as an empiricist. So David Hume had a very unique way of looking at the self, but this is not far as Locke's empiricist idea of the self. To define the self, David Hume did not make use of the word experience, but he made use of the word impressions. So for David Hume, the self is a bundle of impressions. Now that? A bundle of impressions. Parang, you say, pausag ka pungpung. Impressions, with all impressions 1, impressions 2, impressions 3, and gathered all of these impressions, and these impressions made the self. So, just like John Locke's idea, David Hume also believed that the self is indeed a collection of impressions outside of him. It is, in other words, the self is a collection of his experiences outside of him. Now, to sum up the empiricist's idea of the self, this is basically, ito lang yung sinasabi nila na the self is a product of experiences. So, yung experiences natin in the past made us who and what we are today, in the present. And our experiences right now, in the present, will also make us who and what we are in the future. Minsan, napaisip din ako sa ating sarili. Sometimes I also thought that maybe they were right by saying that I became who and what I am right now because of how I was trained in the past, because of how I lived my life in the past, because of how I experienced the world in the past. And all of my experiences in life are all worst to remember. All of my experiences in life in the past are worst to keep in myself. Kahit masakit, yung kailangan natin tanggapin. Kahit hindi maganda yung ating experiences, ayun, maganda man o hindi, everything that happens to our life become part of who and what we are. May tanong ako. How can we qualify experience? Paano natin masasabi na ang isang event, na isang action na ginawa natin ay considered as an experience? Diba? So, basically, in the empiricist's idea, anything that involves our senses, meron tayong senses, diba? Is always part of our experience. Whatever we see, whatever we hear, we touch, we smell, we taste, these all are part of our experience. However, this is also depending on how conscious are we with our experience. Kaya, dito yon papasok yung sinasabi ni Immanuel Kant. No, that Immanuel Kant, as a rationalist, believes that there is a mind that organizes our experiences. So Kant did not actually reject the empiricist idea that we need the body to experience the world. And Kant actually recognizes that the senses or the sense impressions or experiences outside of us is the beginning of knowledge, is the beginning of our ideas within us. However, Kant, as a rationalist, strongly believes that these experiences, these impressions are not just simply infused into us, are not just simply put into us, but these impressions, these experiences are organized, evaluate, categorized by our mind. So Kant believes that we have a mind that organizes these sense experiences that we have outside of us. As a rationalist, Immanuel Kant strongly believes that the mind has an apparatus, and this apparatus is what makes the self. That is why without the mind, then the self could not also organize his ideas, his experiences. The self could not also categorize what is experienced or what is sense or what is perceived outside of him. Klarong-klaro sa atin ito na the rationalist and the empiricist have different perspectives of the self. So, hindi na mahalaga magtatalo ba tayo kung sino yung tama, kung sino yung hindi. Ang mahalaga dito ay ano yung magagandang aral na makukuha natin to apply to our very own self. Diba? So, number one is that the rationalists are telling us that we have a mind, and our mind is one of our greatest power. This is one of our greatest power to understand, to penetrate, and to study the world outside of us. We have a mind that organizes. We have a mind that rationalizes the world outside of us. And ito yung power na meron tayo bilang isang tao. Ito yung ating gift, the gift of intellect, the gift of intelligence na hindi natin dapat left behind. This is the gift that we need to develop, that we need to nourish, that we need to enhance, and of course, that we need to realize within us as a human being, as a self. And this is the gift which we are going to use in making and living the best life as a human person. The empiricists are also telling us that our experiences are very important. Those experiences that we have from childhood until now, no matter how hurtful, kahit masakit minsan yung karanasan natin in the past, happy ba or sad ba yung mga experiences natin, it doesn't matter, because every experience, every event that happened to our life are important, are worth to keep within us. Why? Because these experiences made us who and what we are today. These experiences constituted something about us. These are the elements of how we perceive ourselves right now. These are the elements of how we look at ourselves right now. And this can also be the element of how we create our life to be in the future. So this is Sir June Michael Antone, and before ending this video, I'd like to tell you, every experiences will teach us a lot of lessons in life. However, if you don't mind these lessons will become insignificant